3 versus 2, there's 20 seconds for the attackers to rescue themselves.
Mainstairs looks like a real threat as well, Handy in position. Diffuser's going down, this cover has got to be flawless, but Bride comes off, he's going for the kills, Tim. They've found one, but now they've got to re-stick, and Cyber's in a spot to do a bit of damage here. Trying to bait out once again, Solotov has to win this gunfight. He's got to get Cyber. They're waiting, Solotov's down, Bride's off, he's also down! Fate will wait, but it will not be denied, as FaZe lift the hammer after 3 years of waiting.
Talk about a fairy tale ending. After coming so agonizingly close 12 months ago, FaZe Clan were able to right the wrongs of Sao Paulo and make their own history as your 2025 Six Invitational World Champions. And we even got a special moment on stage as Nate joined his brother Handy on stage just before the latter raised the hammer with the rest of his team. But before we get there, we have 19 other teams to talk about first. We are going to go through the results of S-Side 2025 from bottom to top, talk about how they did, and why in the hell they ultimately lost. Some results were great, others, well, put simply, they were crap. So operators, join me as we review the 2025 Six Invitational. Starting with the teams that got eliminated in groups, and we had some truly shocking results here. If you're an APAC fan, brace yourself, because this is going to hurt. This one is especially painful to talk about. Team Joel. After all the hype and expectation of this roster, especially with the inclusion of Noodle, and they just floundered hard. Started off relatively strong against Liquid on day one, but Joel were not able to get any sort of momentum going. Now, I will give them a bit of a pass. They were actually playing sick for at least 2 to 3 days of groups, which is never ideal. Honestly, this just capped off a torrid 6 months for this roster. These guys need a break come the new season. Scars, I have no words here. Full disclosure, I was not able to watch any of their games, but I also kind of don't want to go back and watch any of the VODs on YouTube. They were just appalling. Like with Team Joel, they were unable to win a map. But unlike Joel, you can't really blame their performance on illness. There's something fundamentally wrong with this team, and they seem either unable or unwilling to fix it. 2025 better be the year they get their shit together. PSG Talon also got eliminated here, and this one was just heartbreaking because they got so agonizingly close. They struggled in their first 2 matches against Team Falcons and Raza Company Academy, unable to win a map in either series. But then they pull off an upset against Dark Zero, and a little bit of hope begins to build. However, their win against BDS will go down one of the best moments in Boston, particularly because of one man. Ryder stepped up big in that series, and even got an ace on Labs to help push his team over the line. In the end, other results just went against them on the final day of groups, and the SI campaign came up far shorter than it should have in my opinion. And the final team to get sent home in groups was the one that no one saw coming, given A, their 2024 season, and B, who was in their group. And that was Team Secret. And this one was the biggest surprise to come out of groups because they were pegged as making the main stage at least. Losing their first 2 matches in the group of death against Shopify Rebellion and Furia is not ideal, but it was to be expected. Unless your group has Carrick Osaka in it, who beat the world champions 2-0. When Secret lost to FaZe Clan, the alarm bells started ringing because they had Carrick on the final day. And the Japanese beat them in a reverse sweep. Secret were uncharacteristically bad at SI. They couldn't get any sort of momentum going. Only their highest rated player in June went positive on KD. They just capitulated in the saddest way possible, and there was seemingly no explanation. Let's hope they can shake this off come 2025, though I am pissed off about what happened surrounding Virtue. But if you thought groups was bad, wait till you hear the playoffs, because shit gets haywire real quick. The first round of elimination saw 2 teams that most people thought would make a deep run at SI this year get sent home at this stage. One of them was a major winner for Christ's sake. But I feel like we need to start with M80 because, holy shit. Second place out of Group A had their pick of who they wanted to play in their first match of the upper bracket, in which they chose Dark Zero. Things were looking up for this squad. And then things just disintegrated right in front of them, all thanks to the actions of one man. I am, of course, referring to their now ex-coach of Bodega, who now finds himself on the receiving end of a second ban following a major misconduct offense for the same thing that got him banned the first time back in 2022. Now, Before we go any further, I do want to clarify something. According to the broadcast, Blast officials quietly communicated to all the coaches that some of them were going beyond the bounds of what they can say to their players in between rounds. For those who don't know, coaches are not allowed to communicate with players outside of tactical timeouts. This means no strat talk in between rounds or during technical pauses, in which all players had to be silent anyway. From what I understand, officials get a little lax when coaches encourage and G up their players following either a round win or a loss, which I have absolutely no problem with. I won't get into the nitty gritty of what happened during that M80 DZ match because A, that's the topic for its own separate video, and B, it's been covered to death by former and current pro players as well as content creators. All you need to know is that DZ was awarded a round win on Bank following Bodega's repeated rule breaking. And then he was ejected from the Six Invitational and subsequently banned for 2 years following an altercation after the match. And as much as I agree with the ruling, for multiple reasons, I feel bad for the players because they got caught in the crossfire, especially since they had to play their final match against Kago Osaka without a coach. Kudos to M80 for showing up in the server and keeping their mental as high as they could under those circumstances. But for them to go out the way they did, it wasn't entirely fair for them. And the second team from North America to go home here was Shopify Rebellion. I'll bet none of you saw this coming, because most pundits, myself included, had these guys as M80's best shot at lifting the hammer. And they didn't even get close. Now that I mention it, they didn't particularly look strong in groups either. They tied with Kago Osaka for third place in the group of death, saved from going straight into the lower bracket by a better round difference, got matched up against Razak Company Academy in the upper bracket, and lost 2-1. They then get matched up against the NA compatriots in Oxygen in the lower bracket, and ended up losing 2-0. Both maps went into overtime. The thing is though, they didn't really play all that badly. The lowest rated player on Rebellion was Canadian, but he was only a 0.93, which is acceptable for him given that he had 19 plants and that ties him with Vidaking on third. The rest of the roster was a 1.0 rating or higher. Ambi was the third highest rated player in Boston at 1.16, despite being eliminated at this point in the tournament, and he was also tied for second in entry kills with both Loira and Loban at 12 apiece, behind only Souls. Nevertheless, this is a huge step down from the top 6 finish they had at SI last year. Let's hope the new season comes with some much needed stability for both the team and the org. Next up is our Montreal Major winners and SI winning organization, W7M. Like with Shopify Rebellion, a lot of people had them making it deeper in the bracket than they actually did, especially since they got second in that group and decided to face off against fellow major champions Unwanted in the first round of the upper bracket. Seems rather spicy, with a winner going into a rematch for BDS from their respective major. But the Brazilians got their asses handed to them on 2 maps. Things did pick up a little bit in the lower bracket, but not enough to carry them over the line against Team Falcons, who beat them 2-1 to send them home. The thing is, like with Shopify Rebellion, they actually had some players put up some really impressive stats. Alongside Loban's 3-way tie for second on entry, Dodes was actually tied with Ambi for an overall rating, and was third outright on KD with plus 41. Something tells me that the group stage may have flattered W7M a little bit given their playoff results. If Scars actually showed up in Boston and put up something of a fight, then I reckon M80's playoff status may have been brought into question. And the last team to go out here was another Brazilian team, Liquid. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Despite now having 2 players to break into 1,000 kills at the Six Invitational, this might be the worst performance this team has had at an SI in years. I feel like if Team Joel was at their full strength during groups, then Liquid may have been grouped for the first time in 2020, as that was their only win throughout the entire tournament. They were able to take maps off of both M80 and Unwanted during groups, but they struggled to nab their second win. They did put up a strong showing against FaZe Clan in the first round of the lower bracket, in the first 2 maps. Consulate was just a wash. Liquid actually put up some solid stats during that brief run at Boston. Nesk and Palu, as mentioned earlier, both cracked into 1,000 kills at the Six Invitational. Palu had the best KD for Liquid at plus 13. Lagonis had 12 plants to his name. Resets was plus 11 on entry. And Maya was the best rated player on Liquid, just above Palu. But something is preventing them from reaching the heights of 2021, where they were runners-up at the Invitational just behind NIP. If they keep this same roster going into the new season and bring in some new support, then maybe we can see them climb the mountain come Paris next year. The second round of the lower bracket is where I start eating some serious humble pie, because this is where most of my predictions start to fall to shit. Two teams that were at the top of their group get eliminated here. A team that most people had tagged as almost reaching the main stage also gets sent home here, and APAC finally had their hopes dashed. And we have to start with CAG Osaka because, and I never thought I'd say these words, they finally made it out of a group stage of an international LAN. And they beat the reigning world champions 2-0 to do it. On the first day of the event, no less. Just let those words sink in a little bit. CAG Osaka defeated Furia on the first day of groups and made it into the playoffs. Can I get a hallelujah and an A fucking man? They went even further and eliminated M80 in the first round of the lower bracket, and even took a map off of Unwanted before getting sent home by the NA underdogs. And you know what? They were actually pretty convincing throughout their run. All of CAG's players broke 100 kills throughout the tournament, and all of them were putting up some pretty respectable numbers. The only one, in my opinion, who was lagging behind a little bit was Black Ray. But don't take that as me heading on it, because he was MVP of day one. Oh, and his stats in CAG's match against Furia were incredible. However, I can't help but shake the feeling that this result may have been nothing more than a fluke. A perfect storm of circumstances that would see them getting arguably the best result in this org's entire tenure. Historically, CAG have always struggled internationally, and domestically they've been playing second fiddle to Scars for the last 2 years. So to see them get to the second round of the lower bracket at SI? Don't get me wrong, these boys should absolutely be proud of getting as far as they did. But if they don't give us the same level of form going to the first stage of the APL next year's season, then some serious questions need to be asked. And the other team that I thought wouldn't even make it out of groups, only to prove me wrong again, and get up into the second round of the lower bracket was G2. Although, they didn't exactly impress in playoffs, losing both their upper and lower bracket matches. Despite going flawless in their group, which may have been a bit of a red herring given how their group panned out, they only took one map off of SSG and didn't even do that against Oxygen. Despite being eliminated here, Alamau had the best cost rating at 76% and was the second highest rated player in Boston at a 1.18. It seems that taking him off the IGL role has really given the guy a lot more freedom to play his own game, with a considerable degree of success. But while Alamau stood up, I feel like the rest of G2 couldn't quite do the same, at least not to the same extent as Alamau did. Don't get me wrong, they still put up some solid numbers. Uno had 15 plants to his name, Doki and Laura both had some pretty incredible entry stats, and Blaz was pretty consistent across the board. But individual stats don't count for shit if you can't put map wins on the board. And for G2 to only win one map out of 5 in playoffs, something clearly went wrong in between groups and playoffs. If you get the first seed out of your group, then you automatically make it to the second round of the upper bracket, and are guaranteed top 6 if you win that match. One best of 3 in the upper bracket, and you'll be playing on the main stage that weekend, regardless of the results of that next match. This is a huge advantage that is the marathon of SI, and G2 could not capitalize on that advantage. But they were not the only ones. Virtus Pro also went out at this stage after coming first in their group. However, their results are both a bit more damning and a bit more forgivable. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it will in a moment. Let's begin with the damning. Like with G2, VP took the top seed in Group D, which included W7M, SSG, and OXG, and Scars. But they didn't have as quite a smoother path to the top spot as G2 did in Group A, and they did have to rely on a little bit of luck to squeak over the line as they had their bye on Playday 5. But given how competitive that group was, that could have just as easily backfired on the Russians. But the playoffs is where I get a bit more forgiving, because both of their losses came from teams that either took the rest of the tournament by surprise and made a deeper run than anyone thought they had any right to, or they were the ones who won the damn thing. And you want to know something funny? Dan was the highest rated player throughout the entirety of SI, and VP were eliminated here. Despite a shortened run, Dan went absolute gangbusters. A 1.26 rating on CGG, plus 49 KD, at 76% cost, a 0.95 kills per round, and 6 1vx clutch wins. That man deserves a fucking medal. However, VP's worst rated player was actually Joystick. A 0.94 rating, -7 on KD, despite cracking 120 kills and a cost of 63%, which is not bad by any means, but it's not the numbers we would normally expect from the Cyborg at SI. It's been said before, and I will say it again. To win the Six Invitational, everyone needs to turn up and play their best. But if anyone can bounce back from the pain of defeat going into the new season and the European League, it's Virtus Pro. And the last team to get sent home at this stage was Dark Zero, who, I'll be honest with you, has earned my respect after what happened in their first playoff match against M80. You have to give DZ and Nafe especially props for not cracking when Bodega got up in their faces after his team lost. However, they didn't exactly impress in the server. Yes, they did beat Team BDS and Team Falcons within groups, but they also lost to Raza Company Academy and PSG Talent. That raises some concerns right off the rip. I will give the Raza loss a pass because they took everyone in Boston by surprise. But the PSG Talon loss is where I really have concerns for DZ, because up to that point, Talon had not even won a map, let alone a series. Putting their win against M80 aside, Dark Zero found themselves up against the reigning world champions in Furia and a rematch against Team Falcons, and didn't win a map in either series. So to withstand all the bullshit in their match against M80, and then to capitulate the way they did, not exactly a good look. Only 2 players on Dark Zero went positive on stats, but only just. NJR was at a 1.02 on Siege GG, and New Dad Bolo was only just barely behind him at a 1.01. And Pambazoo was having an off tournament altogether. -21 on KD, -8 on entry, and a 0.91 rating, which actually ties in with Kobilax. And I think this downturn in form comes down to one thing: personnel changes. After Mint departed the team, Dark Zero brought in Kangaroo Kenny over from Europe as an interim coach for SI, which is not a bad thing on paper. He is one of the best coaches to come out of Europe in recent years. But when you have anyone on a temporary basis with no guarantee of a permanent contract, it was always going to lead to some teething troubles, especially just before and during the biggest tournament of the year. So while I'm not totally surprised by this result from Dark Zero, it does leave me with some serious concerns going into the 2025 season. Moving into the top 8, one series away from the main stage. And both teams that got sent home here did far better than anyone expected them to, but under a couple different caveats. Let's begin with Oxygen, the NA team that qualified through the LCQ and appearing in their first LAN in over 12 months. And all I have to say is this: what a fucking comeback! To be one series away from the main stage at SI after not appearing in a single major all year and eliminating several high-profile teams along the way, consider me impressed. 4th place in their group was never going to set anyone's sights on them, especially considering 5th place Scars didn't even get a single point. But it's who they beat in the lower bracket that makes their run all the more impressive. First round of the lower bracket, they come up against Shopify Rebellion. And not only did they win, OXG won both maps in overtime. No one really saw that coming, much like how no one saw the NA squad beat G2 on the same day. Also on 2 maps. What the fuck? The fact that Diaz was the 5th highest rated player throughout the whole of Boston and had 8 1vx clutches to his name should tell you how cracked this guy is at the moment. But the rest of his team was not quite as good. You could make the argument for Diaz hard carrying the rest of OXG over the line. Sadly, their run would come to an end against Unwanted when they were on the cusp of the main stage. But hey, for these guys to get that result after the year they had, color me impressed. The other team to get sent home just before the main stage was Team Falcons. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, I'm not sure they should have even made it there in the first place. And the reason I say that is because they made it out of the group on a technicality. They only won the 1 match throughout the entirety of the group stage. But because they were tied with PSG Talon on every single stat line, points, maps played, maps won, etc., their win over the South Koreans ended up being exactly what they needed, despite Talon winning 2 games. The Falcons got incredibly lucky. If they did not take a map off of Raza Company on the final day of groups, then their run at SI would have come up a lot shorter than it did. But, to be fair to them, all that matters is they got the points where they needed it. And that was what got them into playoffs. And this is where they get a bit more convincing. Taking out the reigning major champions in W7M and Dark Zero in consecutive games was no small feat. And neither was taking a map off of FaZe Clan, but they just ran out of gas here. The other reason I say the Falcons were incredibly lucky to get as close to the main stage as they did was because no one was really impressing on the stat sheet. The only one who really stood out on paper was Dove, who had a 1.05 rating throughout the entire tournament. And the MVP of Montreal and Robbie was bitterly disappointing with a 0.92. Although I will say it is not entirely his fault. If I recall correctly, the reason why Robbie's numbers at SI were way down compared to Montreal is the fact that the Falcons default to Arabic and comms, which is a language that Robbie doesn't speak. As a result, the poor kid was left to play his own game separate from the rest of his team. If it worked out, fantastic. If it didn't, odds are Robbie was left out of talks in between rounds with the rest of his teammates. Now, at the time of recording, the Falcons have let their entire roster go, so we currently have no idea what the new roster is going to look like for the 2025 season and them going to the EML. Although I have my concerns. And now we come to the main stage, where the top 6 teams battle it out on stage for a chance to lift the hammer. And here we lost the Brazilian underdogs and had the remaining NA teams cut in half. Space Station Gaming had a great run at SI, showing that their team culture and system can absolutely work. But it wasn't enough to take the org to their second World Championship. Third place in Group D behind both VP and W7M sent FaZe Clan and G2 down to the lower bracket in that order, and confirmed their main stage berth despite losing to BDS in the upper bracket semifinals. Unfortunately, their time on the main stage was cut short thanks to FaZe Clan getting their payback in the lower bracket quarterfinals. Honestly, I think these guys have just gone from strength to strength throughout 2024, and the inclusion of Benjamin Master seems to have been just the thing that they needed in terms of stability. And while he didn't put up the most ridiculous numbers that he's capable of, Benja was still solid for the Astronauts when they needed him. And Fultz continues to be a stalwart for SSG, with the captain being the best rated player for the tournament and being in the top 5 for KD with plus 37. However, on the opposite side of the spectrum, Forrest didn't exactly have a great invite when all was said and done. Bottom 10 worst rated players in Boston, minus 53 KD, 64% cost. It was rough for the guy, especially since he was dropped from SSG mere days ago at the time of recording. Let's hope both Forest and Space Station Gaming can bounce back in the new season of the NAL. And Raza Company Academy shot right out of the gate during groups and never looked back, culminating in an incredible run in the upper bracket that no one expected them to go on. Had a couple of strong wins in groups as they tied with BDS on points in their group. They sent both Shopify Rebellion and Virtus Pro down to the lower bracket, making them the first Orgless team to make the main stage of the Six Invitational, at least within the last 5 years. The second team to do that, we will talk a little bit later. When they came up against the reigning world champions in Furia, Raza put up a fight, but they were just outclassed. Still, their top 6 finish was all but confirmed, so nothing was really lost. If anything, they certainly made their case to be picked up by New Org for 2025. And while they didn't have the greatest of matches against Unwanted, even making the main stage for these guys is a huge achievement, especially considering they're looking for a new home in 2025. And I hope they do, because any Brazilian org not looking at these guys with any sort of interest are either mad or stupid. Coming in at 4th place, the last hometown hopes for Boston. The roster went on a dream run and made it all the way to the lower bracket semifinal, despite not having an org behind them. Unwanted. Even with their Manchester Major winning roster split in half, this team managed to pick up the pieces and put on a goddamn show. 3rd place in Group A, above both Team Liquid and Team Joel, Unwanted didn't really show us that same fire that won them the major. It wasn't until the playoffs where they really turned up the heat, with a pretty dominant showing against fellow major winners W7M, setting up an enticing rematch against BDS. Sadly, the French super team got their revenge, and sent Unwanted down to the lower bracket. But this was just the beginning. Despite a scare from Kago Osaka, Unwanted would finally put the Japanese team's run to an end and sent OXG home in the very next game, booking their main stage berth in the process. And a win over Raza Company Academy, it looked like they might actually pull off the impossible. However, FaZe Clan was just one obstacle too many for this Orgless team. Despite not being backed by an org, Unwanted should absolutely be proud of making as far as they did under the circumstances. Spirits was reminding us of how goddamn good he is when Parabellum picked him up all those years ago with 9 1vx wins under his belt and some of the best shield play to come out of North America. Adam and Gavini both had moments of brilliance peppered throughout Invite, with the latter being the highest rated player on Wanted. Hot and Cold, IGL, still had insane game smarts and ice in his veins when it counts, with 17 plants to his name. But the real star of the show here was Dream, who was having the tournament of his life after being dropped by OXG midway through last year. This guy is too goddamn good to not be in a top tier team. He even got MVP of day 1 of the finals thanks to his play against Raza. I would argue that Dream is the most slept on support player in the entirety of North America. And that is not hyperbole when I say that. His former teammates and fellow pro players were singing his praises after Unwanted was eliminated. Sadly, this roster has gone their separate ways as some of the players have gotten offers to join new teams. I for one wanted to see what this roster could have done in the new NAL with full backing from an org. But regardless, these 5 guys and Mint should absolutely be proud of what they achieved in their short time together. And I wish them all the best for what comes next. Coming in at 3rd place, the World Champions of 2024. Expected to have a solid shot of lifting the hammer in back-to-back years. But this time, Furia got tripped up by both grand finalists within the space of 24 hours. However, while 3rd place in the world is still impressive, despite a rough stage 2, it's the way they went out that makes it feel like a disappointment. Despite losing to Kago Osaka in the first day of groups, Furia would sweep through the rest of Group B, sometimes with barely a contest. Then come the playoffs, and here we see the dominance of last year come back into sharp focus, with a brutal display of a Dark Zero to send them down into the lower bracket, and putting Raza Company Academy's upper bracket run to a grinding halt. The odds of Furia doing the double were getting better by the day. But then we come to the finals. And this is where the wheels come off the tracks. Even though they put up a spirited defense against BDS on bank when they pushed overtime, Furia still ended up losing 2-0 in the upper bracket final. Their next opponents in FaceClan, well, that was an even bigger defeat. It was almost like they capitulated in their final map of Cafe Dostoevsky. For the defending world champions to not even win a map on the main stage no more than 12 months following their incredible grand final comeback? Yikes. Though, in fairness, Furia was actually playing pretty well throughout the entire tournament, with most breaking even in the stats or well into the positives. Native Leapox were both in the top 5 for cost, KZ was their highest rated player with a 1.14 rating, and JV92 was just doing what he does best. That being said, the one outlier in this sea of brilliance was Hertz, who had a shocker of an SI compared to 2024, and was the only one on Furia to go negative in both KD and entry. While I don't think this is cause for too much concern in the long run, it will be interesting to see how Furia respond after falling short at SI in 2025. Let's hope they can come back with a vengeance. 2nd place. The runners-up of not 1, not 2, but 3 marquee tournaments for 2024. The twice-cursed French super team of BDS. Once as a coincidence, twice as a connection, 3 times as a pattern. And it's not a good one for this roster. They had all of the ingredients in place to win in Boston, including a map veto advantage. But they just could not follow the recipe again. Now, when I referred to BDS as twice cursed just now, I was not referring to the amount of grand finals they lost coming into Boston. I'm referring to the upper bracket final, because that has become something of a poison chalice. Including 2025, the last 4 winners of the upper bracket final on the Friday would then lose the grand final on Sunday. And just to prove my point, Team Empire won the upper bracket final in 2022, and then went on to lose against TSM in the grand final. Even though Empire beat TSM in the upper bracket final, but this still counts. 2023, W7M won the upper bracket final, but then lost to G2 in the grand final. 2024, FaZe Clan won the upper bracket final, then they lost to W7M in the grand final. 2025, BDS won the upper bracket final, and then they lost the grand final. Are we noticing the pattern here? But in my opinion, I think BDS made it more difficult for them than it needed to before they even got into the server. The ban format they chose, which seems to be the norm for SI, is that they get to pick the first map before any other maps get banned out.
Most people saw them picking it to bank, as they were undefeated on their map for 2 years running. It was their best map bar none, but they instead picked into one of FaZe Clan's permabans in Chalet, which is not a bad map for BDS. But the rest of the veto was not ideal, with Consulate, Nighthaven Labs, Clubhouse, and Skyscraper being decided, which I feel are the most ideal maps for BDS to win a world title. And yes, while they did win their first pick, it went into overtime when it really shouldn't have by all accounts. They then went on to lose the next 2 maps in close fashion on both occasions, with 7-5s on the cards for both Consulate and Labs. And by the time they got to Club, their mental was just shot, with so many small errors in judgment and building pressure on their shoulders. However, I feel like there were some small warning signs early on in groups, as they only won 2 of their 4 matches. Yes, they still took maps off their opponents they lost to, but they still lost those games. And the teams that beat them? Dark Zero and PSG Talent, the latter of which got eliminated in groups. You see what I'm getting at here? Yes, their wins against both Unwanted and SSG were a little bit closer than it should have been, but BDS still got the job done against both NA squads. And sending the reigning world champions down to the lower bracket from the upper bracket final had to feel good. But none of that matters if you can't capitalize on it during the most important match of the tournament. Now, it feels like I'm being a bit harsh on BDS, and in a way, I kind of am. But when you make it to the grand final of 4 S-tier tournaments in the span of an entire season, and you win the only one that is not part of the Blast R6 Global Circuit, then questions need to be asked. That said, it looks like this org is going to have a serious shake-up coming into the new season, as their coach Stu Flex had retired no long within the last week, and both Brede and Shaiko departing the team within the last few days, at least of this recording. So it is going to be interesting to see what BDS do to fill the void left by those 2 massive departures. Big things are happening in Europe. I can feel it. And now, your new world champions. Runners-up in Sao Paulo, coming into Boston with the ghost of SI Pass hanging over their shoulders. And they made it work on the second attempt, making them the 3rd team from Brazil, behind Ninjas in Pajamas in 2021, and Furia/W7M for 2024 to win the Six Invitational. Second place in the group of death behind only Furia. FaZe Clan had unwittingly set themselves up for the ideal scenario. In a trend that is now becoming the norm, FaZe Clan completed the full lower bracket sweep after being sent down from the first round of the upper bracket by Space Station. Team Liquid, Virtus.pro, Team Falcons did not matter, as FaZe were unstoppable. And they were just getting warmed up. The finals is where they really started to flex their muscles. During the playoffs, they beat their opponents 2-1, which made their matches all the more grueling. However, on their way to the grand final, they did not drop a single map against SSG, Unwanted, and Furia. FaZe effectively performed a flawless, clean sweep of the lower bracket finals. And then we come to the grand final, and holy shit, did they shine. Even though they lost the first map of Chalet, they still pushed it to overtime and made BDS work for it. And the one man FaZe needed to step up when it mattered? Cyber? Oh boy did he.
They know exactly where he is, and Tim, I don't think he's got time to go upstairs here. We've got 15 seconds left. Gonna have to full send it and make something happen. And this ain't looking like the way to get it done. He's gonna try West Main. BDS will wait. And this first map looks to be locked up to be theirs. Winning out the 1v1.
But he was not the only one. Every player on FaZe Clan kicked it up another gear during that grand final, chief among which was the MVP of Handy. And my god, that man's game sense is second to none. That blitz clutch on Clubhouse?
Kills the BDS. Get the other side guessing, and FaZe have got to find something here. It's down to a 2 versus 2. Shot in the back again. Shaiko is going up Tim. Finally finds himself down now. Users has got to clutch up big.
This could be difficult. The Blitz just having to make a choice here. Handy. Let's see if the swing will get Users, no!
Fucking ingenious. And fair play to Users, who was on the receiving end of that clutch. I don't think he could have played it any better. We often forget as viewers that we have more information at our disposal than the players do in the server. Many pro players afterwards said that they would have swung as well if they were in the same position. Handy just played that so beautifully. But that just goes to show how switched on FaZe was in that grand final, and how well they were playing both individually and as a team. and I don't think anyone is more deserving of the hammer than the Kingmakers who finally became the Kings. Congratulations to FaZe Clan, your 2025 Six Invitational World Champions. Oh, and that does it for me, the final video of the 2025 season. I hope you enjoyed the ride as much as I did, and thank you for joining me during the last 9 months. For now, I'm going to take a slight break as I get ready for the CJ Showcase on the 13th, and I have one more video prepped before the start of the 2025 season. I hope you all decide to stick around as I cover the next season of the Blast R6 Global Circuit, and who knows, there may be some new surprises along the way as well. Until next time, operators, this is your Resident Silverwolf, signing out.